Before we have the reading today, let me just give you a quick rundown as to where we are in the story. The kings after Solomon have been downright terrible. In fact, Solomon's son is so bad and so harsh in his ruling that the entire country splits into two, into Judah and Israel. And when the Bible describes the reigns of most of the kings that come after, it goes along the lines of, he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. When it gets to the time of today's reading, King Ahab is ruling over Israel. In 1 Kings 16 verse 30, it tells us, Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. If you don't recognize the name of King Ahab, maybe you will recognize his wife's name, Jezebel. And while the names of most of the queens of Israel and Judah are never mentioned, Jezebel's name makes it into the Bible because of her infamous cruelty. So God sends Elijah the Tishbite to King Ahab to warn him to change his ways, and tells him that because Ahab is encouraging the people to worship Baal, who is Canaan's god of vegetation and rain, God is going to stop the rain in the area to prove that Baal is really not a god at all. God then advises Elijah to hide at a spring called Wadi Cherith, and that God will provide for him by sending ravens to feed him. God's word comes true. Elijah is fed by the ravens with bread and meat every morning and evening, but eventually the wadi dries up because there's no rain. Our text today picks up just after this. Denise will be reading from 1 Kings 17 verse 8 to 24.
Then the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have instructed a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called, And bring me, please, a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. Elijah said to her, Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have, and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Give me your son, Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on the bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I'm staying with, by causing her son to die? Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him. The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, Look, your son is alive. Then the woman said to Elijah, Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is from your mouth, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth.
While I was preparing this sermon, this song came into my mind. It's a song by Don Moon called God Can Do It Again. The theology is possibly a little bit dodgy, but it fits with today's reading. This version is sung by the Gospel Echoes Crossroads team. If you recognize it, sing along with it.
Time after time I hear people say to me, why don't we see miracles like there used to be? I still believe in miracles. God hears us when we pray. is God today. God can do it again and again and again. He's the same God today that He always has been. Yesterday and forever, He's always the same. There's no reason to doubt God can do it again. You've asked God to meet your needs, so why not trust in Him? God has done it all before, He'll do it all again. He's willing, much more willing than I could ever say, to perform a mighty miracle in your life today. God can do it again and again and again. He's the same God today that He always has been. Yesterday and forever, He's always the same. There's no reason to doubt God can do it again. God can do it again and again and again. He's the same God today that He always has been. Yesterday and forever, He's always the same. There's no reason to doubt God can do it again. There's no reason to doubt God can do it again.
Time after time I hear people say, why don't we see miracles like they used to be? This chapter of 1 Kings 17 gives us amazing miracles. Within 24 verses we have 3 such miracles. God feeds Elijah with bread and meat brought to him by the ravens. God makes the widow's last bit of oil and flour last until the rain comes again. And God brings her son back to life. They are remarkable. And the fact that they happen so close to each other makes them even more so. While I do love that song, it is a very catchy tune and words. It makes it sound like the Bible is full of miracles, that God is providing left, right, and center. And so it's easy to become disgruntled because God isn't providing for us in the same way. But if we think about it, there was a drought for 3.5 years, and these are the only miracles we hear of during that time. Yes, God does work in our world, and yes, God does perform miracles. But God is neither a vending machine that spits out what we want when we want it, nor is God some magician who does miracles for a living. God has a plan and a purpose, and quite often our plans and purposes don't necessarily line up with God's. But when they do, sometimes they come in the most remarkable forms, ways we would neither expect nor have chosen. The first miracle of chapter 17, which was not in our reading today, is that God sends Elijah to Wadi Cherith, and there God sends ravens to bring Elijah food to sustain him. I'm pretty sure this is not exactly how Elijah would have asked God to provide for him. Firstly, if I were in Elijah's shoes, I would wish to be hiding out in a shelter, a permanent one preferably. A deserted house would do quite nicely, not some valley in the middle of nowhere. Then God sent ravens to feed Elijah. Well, that sounds like a marvelous miracle to us. It's a bit of an insult to Jews. Ravens are one of the birds that God designates as unclean, according to Leviticus 11 verse 15. They were carrion birds and would feed off the dead and decaying creatures. Not exactly who you would want to deliver your meals. And yet, those are the birds that God sends. I'm sure Elijah would have preferred some other form of delivery system, but that is not the one God uses. God could easily have used some other creature, which would have been far more inclined to help, like a buck of sorts. But God chooses ravens, whose natural instincts are to eat anything they can get their hands on. And so God goes against their natural instincts and makes them carry these parcels of meat and bread to Elijah. I'm pretty sure there was more to this miracle than just God feeding Elijah. This miracle was a challenge to Elijah's perceptions of clean and unclean, that God can use even those things that are considered unclean to do miracles. Next, God sends Elijah to a widow of Zarephath, which is in Sidon, who are the enemies of Israel. He meets her and asks her for bread and water, and she says she only has enough flour and oil to make one last meal for herself and her son. But on Elijah's insistence, she agrees to share it with him. God provides by continually replacing the oil and flour so that the meals just keep on coming. Again, I'm pretty sure this is not what Elijah was hoping for. He may have been upgraded to a house now, but his meals have definitely been downgraded. He went from bread and meat to daily bread, made out of flour and oil. And the means of this miracle is not a whole lot better than the last one. It's no longer unclean scavenger birds, but now it's his enemy who has taken him in and providing for him. Again, this would not have been Elijah's first choice for a miracle, but literally, beggars can't be choosers. The last miracle is also not quite what we would have chosen. Don't get me wrong, it's amazing and fantastic, but why did God wait for the boy to die? We're told the boy grew ill and steadily declined, but it doesn't seem that Elijah does anything to help or even requests God to intervene. Only when the boy dies does Elijah make himself unclean by touching the dead body and then praying to God to bring the boy back to life. Why didn't Elijah ask for the boy to be healed when he got sick? Why didn't God save the boy before Elijah asked? Especially after all this woman has done for Elijah. I'm not going to pretend to know what God thinks or plans, but it seems that in these miracles God is challenging Elijah and the nation of Israel, who will read about these miracles later. And if you think that I'm entirely making that up, I'm not. Jesus challenges the people of his time using the exact story in Luke 4:24-26. He says, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon." And what happens when Jesus reminds the people of what happened at Zarephath? The people get so angry that they drive him out of town and try and throw him off a cliff. It seems that they still have not learned what God was trying to teach them. But there's something more behind these last two miracles. God doesn't force people to do anything. God may prompt us, but God can only use willing participants. The widow of Zarephath could have chosen not to share the last of her flour and oil with a beggar who was her enemy. She could have chosen not to take a strange man into her house. It was only in her willingness to share that the miracle could take place. Elijah sat idly by while the widow's son deteriorated with illness, and he could have continued to watch her mourn her son. But he chose to go against everything that he had been taught about death, uncleanness, and enemies, and instead, touching this unclean enemy, cried out to God to save him. While I do believe God still does miracles today, perhaps we don't hear of them quite as often because we as human beings are not as inclined to respond to God's promptings, and are even less so inclined to help those who we deem as other or stranger or our own version of unclean. Prompted by the words of Don Moon's song, which has been echoing through my brain, I went in search of internet stories of modern miracles. It seems that most good news sites shut down over the Christmas holidays, as there weren't too many up-to-date stories, but a couple that were recently published caught my attention. Firstly, this goes along the lines of God bringing about miracles based on things we consider as unclean. I found an article on BBC News in their climate section about a company who is making jet fuel from human poo. Yes, you heard me correctly. Firefly Greenfields has been working on processes to change human sewage into kerosene, which is what they use in jet fuel. While it's not the first article I've read on reusing human sewage, 2 years ago there was an article about an American company who was using human sewage to create fertilizer for crops and how they were struggling to keep up with demand. It's definitely the most interesting and exciting. This company uses a process called hydrothermal liquefaction which is a combination of high pressure and heat, which is good for wet wastes and separates the sewage sludge into a crude oil and a powder or biochar. The biochar is a good fertilizer which can be supplied to the agricultural industry, which is what the previous article was about. It also fixes any carbon back into the soil for hundreds of years. The crude oil, meanwhile, can be processed into sustainable aviation fuel using Firefly's proprietary process. While it's still a very similar fuel to the currently used fuel from fossil fuels, it's more sustainable because as long as there are humans wanting to fly, there will be sewage. While fuel created from fossil fuels technically takes millions of years to be produced, while carbons from plants or animals are broken down over time under pressure and heat, and is therefore seen as a non-renewable fuel, sewage is created on a daily basis by billions of people around the world. Their product is now at the stage where it will be subjected to various tests to make sure it complies with industry standards, but hopefully soon we will be flying in planes powered by our own waste. While some people may not see this as a miracle, for me it's amazing that these people would even think about using something that is seen as waste and unclean, and which the world produces more and more every day, and quite honestly we haven't really used for anything productive in the past, that they would think to create something as needed as jet fuel. It's pretty close to a modern miracle to me, and I'm pretty sure God planted a seed somewhere along the way. Then I read this remarkable story published on the 26th of December about two men, one from Iran and one from Iraq. They were both involved in the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. Hajjad Aboud was one of the soldiers from Iraq who invaded Iran. He and his company were ordered to occupy a bunker which the Iraqis had captured in the city of Khorramshahr. While they were there, the bunker was attacked by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. The attackers were merciless and they adopted a take-no-prisoners policy. Zahed Haftlang was a medic assigned to their unit, and while he was attending the wounded in his unit, he noticed that Hajjad Aboud, one of the enemy Iraqis, was still alive, although he had serious injuries to his head, back and chest. While checking Hajjad, Zahed found a photo of a woman and baby boy in Hajjad's pocket. Despite orders to leave Hajjad to die, Zahed insisted on tending him. Zahed physically fought off comrades in order to save this enemy. He managed to get Hajjad to a field hospital and finally convinced the doctors to treat him. Zahed finally managed to get Hajjad sufficiently healed before Hajjad was taken to a prisoner of war camp for 17 years. Zahed even visited him while he was in this camp, even though they spoke totally different languages and the only means of communication was with gestures. Hajjad was eventually released from the camp, and when he returned home he found that his fiancée and son were gone. Zahed, on the other hand, even after helping Hajjad, was terribly affected by the war and finally ended up homeless on the streets of Vancouver. After a suicide attempt, he ended up at a hospital for mental health crises. While he was in the waiting room, another Middle Eastern man of about the same age joined him. They started talking, and Zahed was surprised when the man, who was clearly not from Iran, could understand him. The man said that he had spent many years in a prisoner of war camp in Iran and had learned to speak Farsi. Zahed told the man about taking an Iraqi whose teeth had all been broken to an Iranian field hospital and prisoner of war camp, only to realize that the man to whom he was talking had a whole lot of broken teeth. Things started falling into place, and Zahed asked the man where he had been captured. After hearing the man's reply, he asked, "Did you keep a photograph of your family in your pocket?" The man replied, confused, "Yes, how did you know?" With that, Zahed responded, "I'm the guy. I'm the soldier who was with you, caring for you." In a desperate situation of war, Zahed saved Hajjad, his enemy. And then, more than 20 years later, on the other side of the world, two unlikely men met again, and this time it was Hajjad who brought healing to Zahed. I know these people are more than likely not Christians, but I believe God works through and for the benefit even of those who are not followers of Christ. What happened to these two men cannot be seen as anything but a miracle. Just like the miracles of 1 Kings 17, God is at work in the world doing extraordinary things through the most unlikely of people. The ravens, the widow of Zarephath, Elijah were all challenged by God to go against their nature to provide for those who were not their own. Elijah and the widow were challenged to accept help from those who were the most unlikely and unacceptable of sources. I do believe there are still miracles taking place these days, that God still uses sometimes the most unlikely and unacceptable of sources to bring these miracles about. And if we are willing to make ourselves available, then we too can be part of these miracles. Let us pray. Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we thank you for these stories of Elijah and the miracles that you worked in his life. We thank you that although there are amazing miracles, there are also challenging miracles. They challenge Elijah and they challenge the people of Israel as they challenge us today. That you work in ways that sometimes we don't expect and sometimes we would prefer not, but that you provide for us. We thank you that you can use even those things that are considered unclean, even people that we consider enemies, to bring about good. And so we thank you for these stories in 1 Kings 17, and we thank you for the stories around the world of people reaching out to strangers, of people reaching out to enemies, of people taking the unclean and making it good. Father, we thank you that you are working in this world, and we offer ourselves in your servants. Help us, use us. Let us be part of the miracles you are working all around us. Because you do it again and again and again. You work your miracles in astounding and marvelous ways. And we long to be part of these miracles. In your name we pray. Amen.